We don't survive by mercy, we survive by record. The signal came like a chime across ice, perfectly pitched and painfully clear. It slipped through our forward arrays and drifted down the command spine as a silver thread, humming to itself in legal frequencies older than any border. The Aurora Court woke at once, shedding maintenance naps, cooling shields and warming tribunal fonts, the way a cathedral warms candles before sermon. I stood in the dim wash of the dais lamps and tasted burned orange peel from the coil filters, knowing that smell always meant witnesses were about to gather. Somewhere outside the hull, the star of Red Vesper breathed, and the ship matched its rhythm like a choir that remembered the score. Court flag is valid, said Gavel 13, our shipmind, with calm the color of stone. CradleNet recognizes an assembly of record at 9 stations. Quorum probable within 2 cycles. That's not what I asked, I said, flattening my glove across the rail until it creaked. Who rang the bell? Presidium Concordium, Gavel 13 replied. Praetor Talon Veer, asserting jurisdiction by gratitude tithe and collar remediation, pursuant to their book of keeping. Vance Izeri, my legal officer, swore softly and arranged his slate like a gambler fixing a tell. They'll call it a harvest. They always do when the bills come due. Open the viewing panes. I said, let's see who thinks they can tax breath. The shutters rolled back with a hush that felt respectful. Past the armored glass, a knotted skein of ships held position around Red Vesper like beads on a prayer line. Their prows were narrow and mean, black metal veined by pale accounting filaments, every hull etched with tiny ledger lines that would glow when they invoiced a world. At the center, a spired carrier floated with a prow that looked like a stylus poised above a page. You could tell their doctrine from their silhouettes. You could tell their crimes from the quiet. Come, I said, and Pilar Ose straightened in her chair so quickly the leather sighed. We'll answer their bell. We'll answer it with a bigger one. Channel shaping, Pilar murmured. Legal tone. No kinetic bleed. On your mark, Praetor Veer, I said, and the court voice shaped my words into a calm that would stand when played 1,000 times. I am Advocate Commander Rhea Solis of the Aurora Court, constituted under the CradleNet, presently holding a quorum petition and a willingness to convene. State your claim in full sentences, on an open record, with the public watching. The carrier's forward arch brightened. A figure assembled in tidy light, not tall, wrapped in a mantle stitched from measured lines. His eyes were gray. In that way, spreadsheets have gray. The color of subtraction. He did not bow. The Presidium Concordium extends a lawful gratitude tithe, Praetor Veer said. Red Vesper's ring population receives navigation, piracy interdiction, and famine prevention rendered by us across 6 cycles. Our rate is a collar fine of 2 out of 10 berths pledged to indenture for 10 years, and an energy tithe at a fair unit of 3% of station output, audited by our book of keeping. Vance made a small note that wasn't small at all. Harker Lynn, our chief engineer, exhaled through his teeth and looked at the ring world as if he could wrap hands around it and pull. Use polite words for slavery, I said. We use precise words for due, he said. Gratitude cannot be a rumor. It must be an account. There is nothing lawful about a chain hidden in a receipt. The words landed harder than I intended, a stamp that made Veer's features shift by a millimeter. Gavel 13 pulsed amber once at my shoulder, the shipmind's way of warning me to spend my edges with care. Power carries interest when you spend it in public. I'd learned that before I ever reached command. Before you proceed, I said, toning my voice to deliberative. We'll convene a public inquiry on Red Vesper's transit concourse in 1 hour. Witnesses will speak before both our ships. Your claim will be examined line by line. We'll test the method, not the mask. If your doctrine stands, it will stand in light." Praetor Veer smiled without pleasure. "We do not perform street theater for frightened laborers." "You do now," I said. "That's what it means to ring the bell on our channel. We retain the right to enforce after non-compliance. You retain the right to be recorded while doing so." He cut the line. His carrier's prow shadows deepened, the way a pen leans when it means to write a name without asking. "Schedule the inquiry," I said into the hailing hush. "Pilar, bulletin the concourse. Vance, pull prior Concordium actions, especially any place they used collar remediation to justify export. Harker, I want a non-lethal show of spine station shield harmonics to stand between those holes in the ring. Shielding will sing in their auditors." Harker said, "They use harmonics like a nose. Then we'll teach them the smell of refusal." We were 30 minutes early to the concourse and still felt late. The air tasted like coins and anxious fruit, that overripe scent of a market waiting for news it can't afford. Vendors had covered their carts with cloth, but nothing hides the shape of hunger in a crowd. The ring's gravity was a soft tug that made your joints grateful without knowing why. Underfoot, the floor's ceramic flecks caught the overhead lamps like stars trapped in a paved night. "Rhea," Vance said, standing just left of my shoulder as we walked up the inquiry spine. "Remember what you promised me when we took this post. You wouldn't let anger draft our filings." "I remember," I said, and tried to knot my hands behind me where they couldn't clench. "I'll hold you if you forget. Do that. And hold me if I don't." We reached the concourse heart, where 4 corridors met like fingers at a palm. The Aurora Court's projection halo rose around the center dais, sobriety rendered as light. Across from us, the Concordium carrier cast a narrower hoop, more like a coin than a crown. Praetor Veer appeared in his ring with 6 attendants, each a moving column of tallied lines. Our audience filled the surrounding steps, dock hands with rope scars on their wrists, cooks with spice on their hands, children still carrying the softness of sleep in their faces because their parents had woken them to learn what a courtroom does. I counted them because counting people keeps you from counting your fear. A woman beside the aisle held a boy close. He wore a shirt 2 letters too big and kept tugging the hem so it would behave. A balance bracelet glimmered on his wrist. Its tiny embedded scales would flash when local gravity drifted by a hair. He watched us the way thirsty things watch rain. I raised my hand. "This inquiry is convened under the cradle net," I said. "Anyone can listen. Anyone can speak, subject to relevance and decency. We will keep this civil because civility is the first armor of the weak. Praetor Veer, you rang a lawful bell. State your method." "Our method is gratitude," he said, standing with perfect posture that belonged to the geometry of his beam. "We render services. You render thanks. Because some station residents exploit public goods without giving. We levy an in-kind pledge of unskilled labor to correct inequity. That is the collar. It is temporary, monitored, and statistically fair." A murmur moved through the steps like wind through foil. A child's bracelet blinked and stopped. Harker shifted his weight near the rail. Vance's slate hand flexed. "What triggers the collar?" I asked. "And who decides?" "Our auditors test for parasitism," he said. "Unlicensed births, unpaid docking, unsanctioned use of power. We have a book. We have rules. We apply a rate." "Your auditors aren't elected," I said. They are appointed by the entity that profits. They are appointed by the entity that renders service. You can't call a prison a pilgrimage because you brought lanterns. Praetor Veer studied me as if weighing whether the line had earned its place. His attendants rearranged their columns, little numbers shivering like frost. Witnesses, I said, turning to the steps. We will hear 3 before proceeding to test a ledger. Speak your names and your ties to Red Vesper. The first was a docker with hands wider than my face, calluses mapped like continents. Eason Rook, he said, and caught himself meekly. Sorry. Eason Rook of 8 Dock, 20 years on the lines, 2 on a collar. Lost 2 nephews to Concordium placement ships when their mother missed a tithe after an air leak. We never saw a ledger show the leak. The second was a baker with flour still ghosting her sleeves, voice steady like dough that's learned patience. Mara Alm, she said, I pay taxes to the ring, to the recycler, to the school. Last season, they said my niece's license had lapsed for 24 hours because my sister was in sickbay. They took her boy in the morning. She makes bread, not trouble. Where is the book we can read? A child stood because he thought that was how you asked the world a question. He glanced at his mother and lifted his chin when she nodded. Airy, he said. Small voice, magnified by the halo. They came to our class and measured how many times we used the air and the light. They said we were lucky. We didn't feel lucky. Across the concourse, a Concordium attendant made a note with a tiny tilt of their head. The gesture looked like mercy if you didn't know the audit's blade sits inside the pen. We will now test the book, I said. And Gavel 13 brought up a copy of their Book of Keeping across the shared field redacted, but not enough. Praetor Veer, turn to your clause 7 on labor pledge conversion. We'll walk it together. He complied because refusal would have been a worse look than obedience. Clause 7 glowed between us like a strip of sky. It described conversion rates in the dry grammar of harvest. How a missed energy tithe could be converted to hours. And hours became hands. And hands became names written in ships' rosters that never docked at the same ring twice. It was a rule book that never allowed grace to be legal. You tether care to debt, I said. You convert debt to bodies. You call the bodies gratitude. How do you justify that math? Because without our interdictors, this ring would be torn by raiders within 6 cycles, Veer said. Because we feed your orphans. Because we stabilized your orbit. Because you owe. Which of those services was consented to by this station in an open vote? We acted under emergency norms when the pirates burned your farms. We saved you. Then you put a price on the breath you didn't let them take. He inclined his head half a degree. A concession or a rally before Perry. We priced risk. You benefit. You settle. The bill for a rescue is not paid with chains. Gavel 13's halo softened a shade, the ship mind pacing me like a teacher near a spirited student. My heart beat in my throat. But the crowd's silence steadied me. Silence that listens is heavier than shouting. It forces everyone to carry. Second test. I said, you claim a collar rate that selects randomly among qualifying berths to maintain fairness. Show us your seed source. One attendant's columns fluttered. Proprietary, he said. Public method or illegitimate instrument, Vance said from my left. Voice like a blade that knows it's sharp. If you won't show seed, the rate is a farce. Veer waited exactly 3 breaths, then signaled something behind his projection. A seed stream opened in the field, a jittering rain of numbers that looked convincing until Harker twitched. That's not random, Harker muttered. and his fingers taught a small storm over his wrist pad. There's a hum pattern. It's biased by power draw variance. They're selecting from blocks more likely to hold families that can't buffer usage spikes. Translate that to human, I said without looking. It punishes poor wiring, he said. If your heating coils are old and surge at shift change, your baby pulls a short straw. The crowd didn't murmur this time. The quiet was a new shape, the shape of understanding. It filled between us and dried into something like anger, the low, controlled kind you can use as lumber. Explain your variance bias, I said to Veer. Noise behaves like its environment, he said. You are trying to make a mystery from physics. Then let's make a demonstration, I said. Gavel 13 mirror their seed stream and run selection under a truly uniform draw, weighted by nothing except the population roll. The ship mind obeyed with a hum that touched the metal under my boots. 2 columns of names began to manifest down the field, one pale, one blue. A pattern emerged so quickly it hurt. The Concordium's list clustered along certain districts like a bruise that keeps blooming. The uniform list spread like honest rain. Stop, I said. Freeze frame. Red Vesper. Do you recognize this bias? S.N. Rook lifted his big hands. That's 8 Dock and 11. Our grids are old. We take the surges when the tugs come in and breathe heavy. Praetor Veer did not change his posture. You are asking to be rated, he said, calm and terrible. We price in what you refuse to fix. We take responsibility seriously. I take responsibility seriously enough to refuse your kind. I almost apologized to my officers for that one, for the heat in it, except the crowd needed a spine to lean against. The law is a house you build from choices, not marble. We pause for an hour. I said, Aurora Court will confer with Red Vesper's Steward Council on a rebuttal filing. Praetor Veer, you and your auditors are invited to remain present and enjoy market coffee with the citizens who buy it with coins, not collars. We withdrew into a side corridor that smelled like fried oil and recycled spices. My pulse felt like it had crawled out of my neck and was knocking at the air. You went hard, Vance said, not quite smiling, but tidy. They showed us their method, I said. We need to return costs without blood. We need a mirror that doesn't shatter. Harker rubbed his jaw. We can't beam anything at that carrier. Their hull will drink it and send a bill for the glare. They've got reflection logic baked in. Not that kind of mirror, Vance said. Eyes gone bright the way they go when he smells a precedent he can teach. A truth mirror. An accounting fold. If we can bind their book of keeping to the public net here and force their conversions to reconcile with the ring's own ledger, we could make every abusive conversion spit back a credit. Pilar leaned into the doorway. Voice low. If we tether their book, they'll scream sovereignty and yank the line. We have hooks. Gavel 13 answered in my ear and the bone. They initiated jurisdiction on our bell. They used our court tone. We can calculate that as consent to cross-binding if we phrase it properly. Then we write, Vance said, already moving toward a patch of wall like a stage. We build a corridor of law they can only walk by telling the truth. We'll start with mutual recognition of station autonomy as a necessity for consent, then ladder up to equitable remedy. Civilization is a contract we renew in the open. We drafted as vendors reopen their carts and fed the nervous with thick bread and cups that steamed. Words can smell like cinnamon when you're hungry enough for justice. The nose translates everything to what the body needs. Children wove between legs and watched our screens the way they watched fish at the school tank. Harker ran power maps and narrowed his eyes at a humming beat in the carrier's belly. Pilar managed flows of tiny messages from ring residents who knew where the Concordium had bent them and wanted to press thumbs to public ink. Loop 1, Vance said. Crisp. Mystery, where do they hide the surplus from callers? Reveal the variance bias. Payoff, cross-bind to return the skim-to-station accounts. Loop 2. I said. Mystery. Why is their rate always the same across wildly different stations? Reveal rate is designed to forecast a private risk pool, not public need. Payoff, clamp their rate to democratic vote thresholds. Loop 3. Pilar chimed. Mystery. How are they choosing who leaves first when they take the young reveal birthdays clustered after power surges due to meter resets? Payoff, we freeze their selection algorithm under a public escrow until after the vote. Gavel 13 pulsed a shade brighter. The inquiry will resume in 12 minutes. Voyer is eating market bread. He pays with stamped credit and does not haggle. Somebody should have taught him the joy of a bargain, Harker said. It's how neighbors talk. Neighbors don't invoice a newborn. I said. Neighbors pass casseroles. We returned to the concourse and found the crowd larger. A trio of old men had made a bench of crates and were playing a lazy game of tiles with the kind of concentration that keeps fear from settling in your marrow. 2 runners darted between steps with paper cones of roasted seeds. A small girl sat with her feet not quite touching the rung below and tore 1 seed at a time, as if each piece could keep her mother from being named by a random stream. The air smelled now of oil and cloves. Proceed, Prater Veer said when we stood, his mantle cued to record. I will answer what is asked. Good, I said. We'll begin with mutual recognition. Do you acknowledge Red Vesper as a voluntary participant in public trade, capable of consent? We acknowledge Red Vesper as capable of exchange. Consent. Capable of agreeing to contracts. Consent. I said again. And let the space after it breathe until silence join my side. Say it. Capable of consent, he said. Now, Vance said with the hint of a smile that had helped me through some long nights, do you acknowledge that consent can be withdrawn when new information reveals coercion in the terms? Veer hesitated. A note left hanging a fraction too long. Consent must be reevaluated when material conditions change. Elegant words don't clean blood from a pen. You admitted variance bias as an environmental artifact. I said, we've shown it extracts more from the poor. That is material. Red Vesper withdraws consent for all conversions under Clause 7 until the bias is removed. Further, we petition immediate cross-binding of your Book of Keeping to the Ring's public net so all conversions reconcile in both ledgers. You cannot bind our book, he said. Our book binds you. You rang our bell, I said softly. You stepped into our corridor. Gavel 13 through the tether. It wasn't a beam. It was a handshake written in law. You could hear it if you had ship ears, a harmonic like thin glass singing under the fingertip of an honest child. The carrier's filigree lit in a pale thaw, reluctantly, as if forced to glow by the accusation of the room. For 3 breathless seconds, the Concordium's Book of Keeping read itself into Red Vesper's public nodes, and 1,000 little tells became bright as lanterns. Here, Vance said, stabbing a finger gently at a floating line, surplus from collar labor booked to a risk pool that purchases private interdictors who then invoice the ring twice. Veer's mouth flattened. Private security is necessary when your stations vote down public defense. Then price the defense honestly and let them vote honestly. I said, we move to equitable remedy. For every conversion made under variance bias, return an equal energy credit to the Ring's ledger, plus 2% for pain. You do not have a court to set remedies, Veer said. You have a parade. We have a quorum, Gavel 13 said in a voice that made the dais lamps pick up their heads. We have 9 stations listening. We have CradleNet recognition. We have consent recorded from your own lips. They came for a toll. We built a turnpike. The crowd turned that line into a quieter thing, a breath that swelled the room without pushing. You can feel a turning like a shoulder finally shucking a weight. Veer's attendants began to move numbers between columns, forced by the crossbind to show where the grain had gone and how much had rotted in transit. On the ring's public side, energy credits appeared like dawn over water cautious, then undeniable. Ari, the little boy with the balance bracelet, watched the ledger counter go up with a face I will never forget as long as I breathe. He didn't cheer. He didn't whoop. He just let his shoulders drop as if someone had finally told him gravity would not change its mind in the night. "Stop," Veer said again. This time not to me. "Sever the bind." "You can't," Gavel 13 said, so gently I almost missed the edge. "Not until your remedy resolves. That's what consent does when it is recorded in public. You will be rated," Veer said. And finally the steel showed. "Without our interdictors, you will be bled. Your station will learn that gratitude was cheaper than grief." "Then let's price it publicly," I said. "Red Vesper, Poll, will you allocate energy to build ring-run interdictors paid at a rate you vote for? Or will you lease your children?" The pole appeared in the air like a new moon. Fingers lifted. Bracelets blinked. Vendors paused with tongs in mid-air and tapped with failed flowery thumbs until their neighbors helped them. I don't romanticize democracy. I have watched it rot. But I have also watched it lace a wound and keep a limb. 81%. Gavel 13 said. Voice something like proud. Allocate energy. Build our own. Veer stared at the number as if it might confess to stealing something from him personally. "You cannot keep our credits. That is theft." "It is returns," Vance said. "You taught this ring longer than you remember with ledgers, not callers. Now the ledger is ours too. The receipt is readable. The reckoning is here. It should have ended there. With numbers returning and a doctrine made to stand in weather, it could not survive. But doctrine never leaves without claw marks. I should have remembered that when I counted costs in my head before I walked into the light." The carrier's prow flared. Not a beam. Not quite. A notice. The color of debt. A rectangle of legal light sent like a thrown contract. It hit the concourse wall 10 meters from the dais and stuck like a wedge. For a heartbeat, I thought it was just a tantrum. A stamp for the record. Then the rectangle liquefied. "Harker," I said, already moving. "Shudder. Shudder," he barked. But the Concordium had built the notice to ooze through shutters and harden on the far side. It crawled toward the auxiliary power trunk like a lawyer who had learned to be a slug. Slow because slow was inevitable. If it reached the trunk, it would penalize the ring's draw by imposing a fine that would default to a conversion, and we would be building interdictors with the taste of a new collar in our mouths. "Non-lethal," I said, biting the word in half. "No kinetic." "Sound," Harker said. "Grim. We could make it forget its shape." Pilar had already pulled the public channel. "All units clear the north wall," she said. "Hands off rails. This is a tone event." We hit the notice with a chord tuned to the carrier's own audit hum. A mirror of a mirror turned until it made the first reflection blur. The rectangle shivered, then stilled, then shivered again like a map, learning it had been drawn upside down. It slowed, but didn't stop. The crowd held their breath the way they would if a man teetered at the edge of a height. "Gavel," I said, and the shipmind had watched me long enough to answer with the thing I wasn't brave enough to ask for. bind the wage to the public ledger as a charge against their book. Make the ooze a line item. It will hurt, Gavel 13 said softly. They will feel the bite on their hull. It will bleed someone, I said. Better it be the hand that swung. The halo flickered. The rectangle froze. For an instant, its surface showed not law, but something like an X-ray, the carrier's belly lit with cramped bunk lines and the conveyor that fed them, the surplus pool blinking, the interdictor purchase history rendered as a convoy of small, hungry shapes. The notice cracked down the center and fell inward, collapsing into a neat handful of cooled legal glass. Harker scooped it with tongs as if it could still bite. Cost 1, I whispered. They will hate us forever. Cost 2, Vance said, staring at the crowd that had not moved to cheer. They will test us where the cameras aren't. The price of dignity is never paid in full. Veer lowered his head for a moment, mantle losing the cautious sheen it had held. When he lifted it, his gray eyes had the kindness of ledgers that forgive nothing. You think you are safe because crowds clap, he said. You think you have a court because you have a quorum. We have roots. We have patience. We have hungry years ahead. We will be back. Bring witnesses. I said, bring vegetables. Bring a vote. He cut his feed. The carrier turned with the reluctant grace of a heavy thing that knows gravity is a law, even it must obey. One by one, their escorts withdrew along routes that were in their book, and now, a little, in ours, Red Vesper's concourse didn't erupt. It didn't break into dance. It did something sweeter. It exhaled. The sound moved across the stone like a long tide. An old woman with a scarf tied in perfect triangles slipped her hand into mine as if asking a stranger to hold a weight while she tied a knot. Thank you, she said, and then frowned. No. That's not the right word. Not thanks. We did this. You showed us how to write it. You did it. I said, and meant it. We only turned on the lamps. She nodded, satisfied. Lamps are useful. We spent the remaining light in filings and harmonics, in the small chores that make a great day stick. Pilar archived the inquiry in 3 languages. Harker inspected the trunk for any residue that might wake ugly at night. Vance sat with 2 council members and built a schedule for rate votes that would prevent the next war from being won by boredom. Gavel 13 braided the cross-bind into calm monitoring that didn't touch unless touched first. At the edge of it all, Aries sat with his mother and counted credits on a public screen, the way cooperative children count puzzle pieces. One appeared every few minutes from a conversion that had to spit back its stolen light. He touched each number without tapping, reverent and precise, as if he was acknowledging a name. Commander, Gavel 13 said privately to the back of my skull, you did not overspend. Feels like I did. You were seen being careful. I don't care about being seen, I said, and knew it was only half true. I care about teaching them to do this when we leave. They learned a shape, Gavel 13 said. They will remember it when the handsome strangers are gone. Don't call me handsome, I said, because if you don't tease your ship mind after a day like this, you'll cry. I didn't, Gavel 13 said. I assigned symmetry. Symmetry is handsome. I prefer accurate. We ate late at the market because nobody with a conscience eats law for dinner. The stew was thick and black and tasted like a field that refused to freeze. Harker told a story about a station that once used coffee grounds as a voting currency just to make the counts smell better. Pilar traded recipes with a vendor who made spice ladders with 6 steps and swore the 4th would fix loneliness. Vance sipped water and stared at nothing the way he stared at questions when he knew their answers wouldn't be clean. "They'll bide," he said at last, voice small enough that the spoons didn't stop. "They'll look for a hinge we can't see. They always do." "I know," I said. "We'll file an advance alert across the net. We'll ask for watchers to sit in dark corners with quiet eyes. We win when we make witnesses into architects." I slept 3 hours on a bench that smelled like lemons and old brass. When I woke, the concourse had emptied into a dawn that rings don't have but pretend for their own hearts. A runner had left a paper cone of seeds by my hand, with a note scrawled in a strong child's hand, for when you count. I ate one, and it tasted like salt and decision. The ping came not from Red Vesper, but from a station 2 hops inward along the coil of trade, a smaller place called Chaff House, known for its barley brines and the way its hull sang in certain winds. They were under a soft ring from a Concordium scout that looked like a tick that had learned manners. Prater Veer did not waste patience. Gavel 13 said, "He distributed annoyance." "Reroute," I said, standing with bones that didn't appreciate being summoned. "Signal the net that we'll be late to our scheduled inspection at Thrum Forge. Ask Thrum to hold their filings for a day." "Done," Pilar said from a yawn. "Chaff House has no inquiry dais. They've been too small for an assembly." "Then we'll bring a folding one," Harker said. "I've been wanting to test the portable mirrors." Vance was already writing on his slate the way a runner twitches before a bell. Different crowd, different stakes, same doctrine. We'll need a new corridor. They'll have learned not to show seed. "They'll slip," I said. "They always do because power is louder than cunning over time." The Aurora Court turned her prow and let Red Vesper's dawn slide behind us like warm water. I watched the ring until it was a neat coin in a purse I didn't trust, then watched until it was a speck of light on a ledger I was learning to love more fiercely than flags. The court hummed to herself, checking her fonts, smoothing her robes. We were for another station now, another market, another mother who would try to hide her fear under a scarf tied in triangles so neat they almost looked like armor. Chaff House smelled like boiled grains and nickel dust. Their concourse was barely a widened hallway, a place built for function before spectacle. People wore aprons stained by honest work and looked at us as if they were slightly embarrassed to need anything from a ship with lights that clean. The Concordium scout hovered near the ceiling like a sting left by a creature you couldn't name without making it sound too alive. "We'll need to ground this one faster," Vance said, scanning the walls with an eye that had learned to count screws when he couldn't count votes. "They've sent a smaller bell and a better lawyer." The lawyer arrived in a projection shaped like brevity. She wore no mantle, only a binder's ribbon tied across her chest in a single loop. Her voice was precise without being cold, almost kind by comparison to Veer's subtraction. "I am Auditor Legal Yara Sill," she said. "We seek only to resolve a small arrears regarding a contingency fund. No callers, no pledges, only a housekeeping matter." The crowd relaxed in a way that frightened me. Relief can make you soft around the ribs where the knife likes to go. "Let's ask housekeeping what broom they brought," I said. "Yara, state your method for contingency calculation." She did. And it was cleaner than Veer's brute conversion. They had built a credit default swap around the station's energy futures. A neat mechanism that looked almost elegant until you realized the payout trigger was not pirate attack, but underemployment. If too many people took a day off work because their children were sick, the swap would pay in their book, in hours. It would pull credits at a rate that tasted like absence. Now who profits when rest becomes a liability? Her mouth twitched. A tiny movement that said she enjoyed a proper fight. We insure against volatility because volatility kills stations. You place a bet against our sick days and call it love, I said. We will mirror your swap into a community pool. When your trigger fires, it pays our clinics. You cannot rewrite our contract with a mirror. Consent sits on the table, Vance said. We're in a room. The net is listening. Yara stepped one pace closer to the limits of her projection. I smelled barley. She must have asked her system to reference local air so her voice would sit more comfortably in the room. I have read your Red Vesper transcript, she said. It is technically impressive. It will not save you here. We have no variance bias to expose. We have no collars. We have only a swap and a tidy mechanism. That tidy mechanism devours weekends, Harker said under his breath. Then we will feed it boredom, I said. Yara, we propose a daylight clause. Triggers cannot activate in hours when clinics are open, schools in session, and public kitchens serving. That's 30% of your window. We will also add a human override. 3 signatures from elected stewards suspend the trigger for 8 hours pending a vote. You are inventing law to win the day, she said. I am inventing light to show the day, I said. If your swap is as benevolent as you claim, it should survive an 8-hour nap. The just instrument does not fear sunlight. Her binder's ribbon tilted with the smallest acknowledgement of a hit well placed. The scout ship's filigree pulsed, resistance learning it might be better dressed as compliance. The people of Chaff House stood a little straighter. Relief can soften you, but it can also turn into posture if you allow it to wear boots. Public vote, I said. Because the habit was already in my mouth and I had no desire to break it. Chaff House. Do you accept the daylight clause and the steward override as conditions for participation in any risk instrument touching your winter or your children? Hands rose like wheat answering wind. Even those who didn't lift anything leaned with their shoulders, which is another way of voting if you understand bodies. 88%, Gavel 13 said. Clarity made sense. Yara breathed out through her nose, a longer, slow ribbon of resignation that was not collapse. You are tedious, she said, and somehow made it a compliment. So are ledgers, I said. They are the bones of trust. Teach by numbers, remember by ledgers, never by collars. The note came from the net. A small in-universe footnote added by a ship older than both of ours, and signed by a human hand that had once stood where I stood now. I felt it land in my chest like a quiet oath. Yara saw it too, and did not sneer. She tied her ribbon tighter and nodded, conceding process, if not affection. We set the mirrors. We folded their swap until its trigger paid clinics first. Children always. Weekends never. We signed with stewards whose aprons still smelled like yeast. We ate brine barley that made our mouths water and our eyes feel like they had been washed with cold. Then we stowed the folding dais and prepared to depart with our ship's robes folded neat, the way you fold a garment you hope to wear again without blood on it. We had our second escalation before we cleared their gravity. The Aurora Court shuddered in a way that wasn't mechanical. Pain moved through her like a measured wave, a hurting made of math. Gavel, I said, already at the dais before my feet admitted they'd moved. Report. External bind, the ship mind said. Not kinetic. A lean. Explain it like I have bread in my ears. They filed a claim on our hull in a far registry where old agreements sleep. Gavel 13 said, they say we owe fees for convening inquiries that reduce the value of existing private instruments. They are charging us for telling the truth. Vance looked like a priest who had been handed an insult in church. Is the registry legitimate? It's real, Gavel 13 said. It's all so old and lazy. Can they seize us if we dock at a port that honors that book? Pilar asked, eyes already scanning routes like threads. We can avoid them for a week, not forever. They can seize our fonts. Gavel 13 said softly, not my body, my voice. The thought of our court without fonts, a court without a voice, made my tongue feel like a tool I didn't own. We cut the line before it binds. I said, we go to the registry ourselves. They will not expect you to show up where their paper sleeps. Vance said, eyes alight with a joy so clean it frightened me. They expect us to shrug and adjust, to work around. If we walk in and ring the oldest bell, we can wake the clerks who remember why courts were built. Where I asked, leaning into the rail that smelled like lemon oil and hands. Orpheum spoke. He said, deep dock in a slow orbit. Bureau keeps dead books in cold there. You go to pay respect to ghosts and ask them to speak. How long? Pilar asked. 2 days burn. 1 if we sing hard. Sing hard, I said. Harker, find me extra breath without stealing it from life support. I'll make the engines think they were loved as children. He said, they'll want to impress you. Power lines, Pilar said. Cheeks flushed after the joke like she'd stolen a sip of heat. We'll need some for the clerks. I always pack a lantern for old rooms. The Aurora Court turned her face toward Orpheum spoke and made the stars look like they had arranged themselves just to watch a ship keep faith with its own name. We burned. And the hull hummed. And Gavel 13 whispered case law to herself the way some people hum songs when they must not forget the words. I walked the command spine twice and then a third time because the body likes to know where it lives when the mind is full of paper. Pilar came to walk beside me on the third pass. You were gentle with Yara, she said. I liked it. She was less cruel with her tool, I said. That matters. Will they ever like us? They don't have to, I said. They only have to stop taking children. I can live without love. I cannot live without light. We came into Orpheum like a pilgrim who had remembered their own feet. The spoke looked like nothing so much as a bundle of shelves tied together against a wind-only math can feel. Ships drifted at respectful distances, engines low, voices down. The Bureau's seal hung over the long mooring like a lamp wrapped in old cloth. It smelled like dust and rules, like ink spilled in the right place. We docked. We disembarked with our robes neat and our filings stacked like bread. Clerks looked up from their long tables with faces that knew what it meant to be woken for good cause. No one smiled. No one scowled. It felt like a true place, where the ground is level because someone checks it every morning with a string and a weight. We ring the bell, Vance murmured, eyes shining. We ask the old book to remember what it was for. Then we give it a mirror, I said. And if it looks away, we will show it faces. Gavel 13 dimmed her halo to respect the room. I stood in the center and lifted my hand. My voice did not need to be loud. It needed to be careful. Registry of Orpheum. I said, we are the Aurora Court. A lien has been filed against our fonts in your cold books by the Presidium Concordium, claiming fees for reducing private instrument value through public inquiries. We ask for review. We ask for daylight. A clerk with hair like wire and hands that love paper more than people looked up and nodded once. Open file. She said, bring witnesses. We brought numbers. Vance said, offering the ledger split from Red Vesper, the clinic swap from Chaff House. We brought returns. The wire-haired clerk tapped the table twice. The surface turned to a pool where text could swim. The lien unrolled like a polite snake. Scales made of prior filings and faint dust. They've tried this before, she said. They've succeeded against weaker fonts. We'll be tedious, I said. We'll explain until even the dust is bored of them. The dust remembers who brushed it gently. The clerk's mouth twitched the way Yara's had. Proceed, she said. And speak as if the room is full of farmers. It is, I said. They're just wearing different shirts. We began. We named what they had named fees and showed where the fees fed teeth. We read a page aloud and then a story. We brought a mother's scarf and placed it on the table beside a paragraph, not to manipulate but to remind. We did not make anyone cry. We made 3 clerks set down their pens and look at their hands as if deciding whether hands are for writing or for kindness, or both. When we paused to swallow water that tasted like it had been kept in cool stone, the wire-haired clerk lifted her head. Your method returns costs, she said. You do not burn fields. We prefer harvest to scorched earth, I said. You are not the first to say that, she said. You might be the first to make it boring in a way I trust. Boring is a holy word, Vance said. Boring is where fraud goes to die. Enter this precedent. You cannot charge a voice for speaking truth. The clerk wrote the line in the margin. Not in law yet, but tasting it there like bread you are not yet sure is baked. She looked at me as if to ask whether I meant to keep talking or breathe. I inhaled and tasted dust and rules, and an old kindness hidden under both. We have one more demonstration, I said. We can show the lien on our fonts as a line item in the Concordium's book if you allow a mirror for 5 minutes. We will bind it to their surplus pool. We will let the numbers tell you who eats whom. Do it, she said, and turned her pen to watch. We threw the smallest mirror we had, the kind meant to be portable and precise. It kissed the cold book and showed the lien's shadow sliding down a page that had fed 2 mini private meals. It wasn't dramatic. It was math with its hands open. The room breathed in the same slow unison I'd heard on 2 stations now when the organism called people finally realizes its blood has found a better route. The clerk lowered her pen and picked up a stamp the size of a quiet. She pressed it to the page, and ink spread like a sunrise that knows it has all the time in the world. She lifted it. She spoke, and I stood with my hand steady at my sides, waiting for the word that would decide whether we could still sing. The clerk's stamp rose and hung for a heartbeat like a small moon over an ink sea. And then it kissed the page with a weight that felt older than trade. The sound was gentle, the tone of a teacup set down by someone who has already decided to stay. I smelled iron and paper and a starch that reminded me of my grandmother's Sunday shirts, the kind she wore when she wanted rules to behave. Reviewed, she said, voice carrying as if the room itself preferred her words to echo. The Presidium Concordium lien attempts to monetize a public voice for fulfilling a public duty that is not fee, that is fetter, by authority of Orpheum Registry, by continuity with first petitions. We void the lien, we censure the method, and we bar attempts to bill speech in instruments lodged under our care. Vance closed his eyes and opened them again as if afraid the room would vanish when he blinked. We ask for memorialization. He said, make it durable. Make it travel. The clerk reached to a brass lever bracketed into the table. It was polished by decades of careful hands and smelled faintly of citrus oil. She pulled. A bell rang somewhere beneath the floor. The kind of bells ships used to use when stars were younger and law needed sound to feel real. On the wall, a slate slit woke, and a line appeared in old script and new font both, because tradition and clarity make better friends than either admits. You cannot charge a voice for speaking truth, she read aloud as the text brightened. public ledger entry is live to the CradleNet and the slow thread. Confirmed. We cut the invoice from the throat of the song. I hadn't planned the line. It arrived the way certain lights do, perfectly angled when the door opens at the right hour. The clerks did not applaud. Orpheum didn't do applause. Instead, the wire-haired woman adjusted the scarf at her neck and looked at us with a recognition that felt like welcome disguised as indifference. "There is a cue," she said, the tiniest apology folded into duty. "Other petitions, other small fires. You're free to walk the shelves while we archive and cross-notify." "We'll walk," I said. "Our ship will hum thanks." Outside the chamber, the air tasted older. Dust carried a sweetness you only get in rooms that held bread as often as they held blades. Shelves leaned like tired giants who had learned to sleep standing. I traced spine after spine the way I had traced railings as a child, telling myself that the ship would not leave without me, and knowing she would wait forever if I asked. Gavel 13 thrummed in the bones of the mooring like a cat pretending not to purr. Pilar fell into step beside me, eyes catching titles like a magpie that had learned to read. "There's a comfort to boring," she said. "You were right. I'm only right when rooms like this agree," I said. "Otherwise, I'm a loud guest." Harker met us at the end of the aisle where a glass case held a ring bolt older than most languages. "Fuel trims clean," he said. "Engines are smug. They liked being asked to carry us to a library. Everyone likes it," Vance said, joining with that lateral half-step lawyers use when they're ready to whisper and shout in the same 10 minutes. Even the Concordium, in their way. They believe they are librarians of obligation. They just keep counting heads instead of debts. The wrong measurement turns neighbors into inventory. We left Orpheum without ceremony because ceremony would have turned the thing into a story, and stories invite rebuttal. I wanted precedent more than praise. Back aboard. The court's robes warmed and the fonts brightened. A quiet celebration in tones only we could hear. Gavel 13 sent a thread along the net that felt like a hand on the back of a friend who doesn't like hugs. "Registry notification propagating," she said. 3 stations have echoed the entry, 2 have translated it, and 1 has set it to music. "Which one?" Pilar asked, unable not to grin. "Stitch Bay," Gavel 13 said. They put a drum under the words. "It slaps." We were one breath into route planning when Red Vesper called back across the light. "Not panic, not alarm. The tone you use when a guest leaves and a shadow you trust still falls across your door." The Steward Council seal glowed like a clean kettle on a tidy stove. "Commander," said the council head, an older man with wrists like cables and the voice of a neighbor who insists on bringing too many onions. "They've posted a counter." "Not here. To the route." "Define route," Vance said, already pulling a screen toward him with hands that knew how to carry a soup bowl and an argument without spilling either. The Presidium filed a jurisdictional assertion in the High Book. The steward said, "They want a star court on Concordia Arc. They claim your mirrors trespass. They claim we lack the sophistication to consent." Harker said something into his fist that might have been a prayer if the god had been a welder. Pilar's mouth made a small O and then corrected itself into a line. Gavel 13 dimmed 2 degrees, not worse for wear, but rolling her shoulders the way good fighters do before a longer round. "They've dragged us to their floor," I said. "Of course they have. They think architecture decides honesty." "Will you go?" the steward asked. "Yes," I said, because there was only one answer that would let us ever sleep again. "We'll go and demand glass walls. We don't win by hiding, we win by explaining." Concordia arc sat at the center of a web of roots like a mature spider's best day, threads taut and minutely trembling. You could taste wealth in the dark there. It has a texture separate from money, a smoothness at the edges of corridors, a heat under your soles just warm enough to say someone had purchased comfort and meant to keep it. Their court hall was a long womb of light, benches floating in careful arcs, a ceiling that moved like thought under ice. We docked. We stepped out without robes because the Star Court has opinions about costumes and because we wanted to look like people, not symbols. Vance carried the filings. Pilar carried the public arrays. Harker carried a wrench he called a tuning fork and swore would never touch a bolt because its real job was to make certain songs into straight lines. Prater Veer waited at the far end of the hall beneath a sculpture that tried and failed to make steel look tender. He had not softened. Auditor Legal Yara stood 2 steps behind his left shoulder, ribbon still neat, eyes like someone who had brought an umbrella without checking the weather because experience beats confidence 9 times out of 10. 100 observers were arranged like polite teeth, their faces a mix of curiosity, contempt, and genuine interest that can be mistaken for kindness if you've never needed anything from it. The presiding magistrate resembled a lighthouse, and a tree had a child who wanted to be both. She was tall without towering, rooted without being immovable, and her voice had layers I could feel in my bones. "Parties," she said, with a slight nod to acknowledge our names without getting caught in their nets. "You bring a doctrine war disguised as math. You will not insult our time by pretending otherwise. We will test method. We will demand daylight. We will go home before dawn." "Understood," I said. "Understood," Prater Veer echoed, with the tiny smile of a man who believes he has already priced his losses. "Begin," the magistrate said, gesturing with the smallest motion toward a pane that appeared between us like a page volunteering to be read. Veer opened with theater dressed as subtlety, the way he always did. He presented a model where interdictor costs were smoothed across a region, a pooling method that looked so gentle it damn near petted you while it picked your pockets. He framed collars as temporary skill programs. He drew a slope showing pirate pressure like a weather map that had learned to blame rain on the poor for choosing to live outdoors. He did not say gratitude in a way that sounded like grace. He said it as if the book were a mouth. Yara stepped in twice to steady his phrasing when it threatened to admit blood. I watched her, and she watched us, and something like weather moved across her face and away again. Too quick to forecast, but not too quick to feel. We answered with plainness. Vance spoke like bread. He showed the variant's bias without insult, not calling their seed evil, just flawed, the way a scale misweighed if you refuse to calibrate it in public. He laid out the clinic swap from Chaff House so gently that even the observers from Bank stopped fidgeting and watched their own hands to see whether they'd look like theft. Pilar let the crowd see the returns appear small, persistent lights across the net, an aurora made of consent, not awe. The most dangerous lie is a kindly rate. The magistrate's head ticked 1 degree. Approval was too strong a word. Permission might be closer. Praesidium, she said. Respond without hymns. Veer showed a test cohort that passed an audit. He showed 3 stations that voted to accept his rates and 2 that begged him to collar anyone who didn't volunteer. He showed a picture of a pirate boarding, taken from a lens the way you take hair from a comb, carefully, theatrically. He used a phrase I hated: necessary roughness. We can't build a world where every throat is consulted while the blade is falling, he said. crisp as a winter apple slicing under a good knife. We build a world where fewer blades fall, or where the blades fall in neat columns. I said, "Your book loves the way bodies look when stacked." He didn't flinch. He ignored the bait because he thought he'd already hooked me. "We propose a consent index," he said. "If a station's civic scores fall below a threshold attendance, maintenance, vote participation consent is presumed impaired. We act. We bill. We correct." "Correction is a word that should come with apology," Vance murmured. And though he kept it under the breath, a room could see it. The magistrate raised a brow that said she had noticed which side whispered when. We pivoted to our corridor. We offered a compact. Any doctrine that converts public debts into bodies must show random seeds in public, reconcile selection to uniform draws under independent watches, and commit to daylight clauses for all risk instruments touching food, clinics, and school. We added one more requirement that hurt to suggest, because it would bind us to a mirror that routes all surplus from conversion into public pools, unless a vote authorizes private retention with supermajority thresholds. Veer's mouth smiled with just his left corner. "You hobble response," he said. "You chain the hand that must be quick. You shackle children," I said. "You chain ankles and call it fast. We don't trade spines for speed." Yara stepped forward then, ribbon catching a sun that was more lamp than star. "Magistrate," she said, eyes on the pane, not on us. "A question of scope. If the court's mirrors reach our surplus pools, must their returns also reconcile against our outlays when we rebuild stations? If we feed them, does the mirror pay our grain?" I liked the question because it was honest. I liked it less because it would hurt to answer cleanly. "Yes," I said, before Vance could finesse it into silk. "The mirror must also return us when we pay for clinics and locks. But the ledger must be readable by those whose breath it counts. No more private fonts. No more linen curtains over the soup." The magistrate's mouth curved in a way that looked very slightly like the first smile a statue allows after a century of public duty. "We set a test," she said. "You say your mirrors return costs. They say their books save lives. Pick a system-level event and show me who pays, who decides, and who eats after. When we are finished, we will stamp." They chose a famine drill because accountants like scarcity and because the sight of a table bear can make any room argue faster. The pane filled with a model of 7 stations, 3 prosperous, 2 middling, 2 frayed. A blight moved through the hydroponics slowly enough to be obvious. An interdictor cohort demanded fuel to guard shipments. Pirates massed at one lane because predators like rumor. 100 variables blinked like a hostile constellation. Presidium method, the magistrate said first. Veer's cohort flowed. Rates were applied. A collar lottery spun. An energy tithe drained from the richest first, then middle, then poor. But at slopes that comforted the eye more than the stomach. Private interdictors purchased with surplus arrived on time. The famine ended without slashers boarding, but the cost landed heavily in the districts whose coils were old. Their children were scheduled for temporary skill duty, a phrase that tasted like soot. Court methods, the magistrate said. We didn't make it pretty. Harker refused to massage any curves because curves soothe, and we wanted discomfort to teach. We set vote pulses with daylight windows, warming school kitchens while risk triggers napped. We pooled surplus by mirror into clinics and food first, then interdictors on public contracts with public bids, paid enough to be proud but not enough to become kings. When pirates massed, the net saw them because Lieutenant Pilar taught the watchers to count shadows, and because the net loves gossip when gossip saves grain. The famine ended with no callers, and 3 small riots in prosperous rings that didn't like paying for poor neighbors who had never been invited to their parties. Cost, the magistrate said. Public patience, I said. We pay in arguments and long meetings. We pay in votes that start late because soup spills. We pay in the time it takes to teach. Your engines, Harker added. Flat. We burn cleaner routes that take longer to secure lanes with watchers. Not mercenaries. I give up my right to be purely clever. 2 of our stewards resigned, Pilar said softly, eyes meeting the broad window where Concordia Arc kept a courteous simulation of dawn. They said they didn't sign up to dawn 100 times for one famine. We'll miss them anyway. The price of decency is time and tenderness, not teeth. Veer didn't gloat because he was too careful. He did adjust his cuff in a way that suggested a ledger had just balanced in his mind where we could not see. Magistrate, he said. Result speaks. We save lives with fewer tears. They save pride at a cost of delay. The magistrate touched the pane and both models froze in twin, uncomfortably honest poses. Your method is faster, she said to Veer. It is also cruel in a way that trains cruelty upstream. She turned to us. Your method is slower. It assumes a body politic with patience and taste for chores. We can train taste, Vance said. We can't unfang a child once you've fitted teeth. Verdict, the magistrate said. And the halls stiffen the way rooms do when they expect iron. I find that mirrors tethered to public ledgers are lawful and encouraged. I find that collars are unlawful when procured by instruments that convert debt under covert bias. I find that gratitude rates must be voted where they land and read aloud where they bite. I find that billing a voice is a sin against the net. I find that speed is not a virtue alone. Yara did not wince. She did not smile, either. She lowered her eyes to her ribbon and retied it, a gesture so small and strange I could not name its weather. Praetor Veer closed his book with a sound like soft rain on steel. Remedies, the magistrate said. We offered them the thing that would keep this from becoming a victory you frame instead of a tool you use. We offered a corridor written in thick language for tired rooms, a bundle of thresholds and readable forms that any steward could carry like a basket without busting its handle. We offered watch stations, a quiet network of kitchens, clinics, and schools that would serve as living sensors, paid by a tiny mirror fraction to report before blades fell. We offered a cap on private interdictor profit when secured by public grief. We offered a way to turn profession into service without calling it debt apprenticeship pools with tuition paid up front by surplus, not clawed back from childhood. Public ledger, the magistrate said, and the wall opened again. The clerk's stamp from Orpheum was mirrored here in steel and light. We add an entry. The words wrote themselves from our filings and her duty. Collars outlawed where consent is impaired or bias undenied. Mirrors required where conversion touches breath. Voices free. Rates voted. Surplus public unless the people permit a dignity fee with supermajority and sunset. We plant law like lamps and walk home by their light. I felt a burn under my sternum that might have been relief and might have been cost. Prices don't always present immediately. They collect like frost in old joints. The magistrate lifted the stamp and pressed. The sound echoed up into the ceiling and down into the floor and out into the net where Ari at Red Vesper would be able to read it without asking a clerk for help. Praetor Veer spoke into the quiet with a composure that made me want to throw something small and legal at his head. We will comply, he said. We will appeal to the slow thread because our doctrine predates your grandmother's tea. We will adjust instruments. We will not starve because you blinked at the word collar. I'd settle for you starving your appetite, I said. He inclined his head like a man acknowledging a toast poured by someone he would never drink with again. Yara made a small sign with her ribbon that I couldn't parse and then let it fall to its tidy rest. We left under a sky that pretends at dusk so rooms will know how to lower their voices. Concordia Arc's corridors smelled like water and new cloth and a hint of something like clove, probably a cleaning agent elected for its dignity. We reached the mooring. Gavel 13 hummed a scale that sounded like she was checking her teeth in a mirror she trusted. Font's intact, she said. No leans. Route us to the long way, I said. We'll light the watch stations as we move. Already pinging kitchens, Pilar said. They're faster than we are. Someone in Stitch Bay has turned the verdict into soup instructions. Harker laughed. The way a wrench laughs when it doesn't have to become a weapon. Good. Soup first. Then locks. We were 1 hour outbound when the cost landed. The court's third font hiccuped and dimmed. Not catastrophic. Not dramatic. Just enough to make 2 telltale lamps on the dais go from proud to patient. Gavel 13's voice dropped half a tone. The way voices do when throats are tired and masks are heavy. Say it, I said. I can keep the font steady or maintain the cross binds at full attention, she said, calm in a way that made the air warmer. Not both. We can still speak. We can still see. But the mirror net will be slower. Messages may lag. Numbers may take a night. Can we burn for a repair yard without dulling the net? We can drift and sing, she said. Or run and whisper. We choose to whisper loudly and drift with purpose. Vance looked at me over the top of his slate. His eyes asked a question I could feel in my chest before I heard it in my ear. I nodded. We would not darken our mirrors to polish our robes. We would take the long road with lanterns hung leave by leave so nobody would think law is a fire you borrow only when you're cold. The second cost came with a different note. A message from Red Vesper. Simple and terrible in the way good people deliver bad news. Essen Rook had been hurt on the docks when a line snapped. Not dead. Not broken in a way that would end his work. But hurt enough to learn weather in his bones from then on. The kind of hurt a judgment can't fix, and a credit can only comfort. I read the note twice. I pictured his wide hands. I remembered the scar across his wrist that looked like a river changing its mind and bit the inside of my cheek because the body often wants salt with truth. Send something that smells like bread, I said. Something waited. No speeches. Pilar typed without looking at her fingers. A heating coil voucher and 3 months of bakery credit, she said. From the public pool. In his name. We moved station to station like that for a while. Not racing. Not lounging. The net learned our pace and adjusted like a good partner who has stopped trying to make you dance a different way. We lit watch kitchens that served soup with verdicts written on the bowls. We tuned mirrors that didn't flash, but quietly filled clinics first, and then put locks on doors so grief couldn't wander in for the night. We turned a dozen small fights into a dozen longer chores that the stewards could win with schedules and patience. Praesidium ships kept sliding at the edges of forests we now patrolled with lanterns. They tried new instruments that looked like care and smelled like control. Yar appeared at 2 stations with clean contracts that actually were clean, and we signed them with her ribbon pressed under our stamp because a doctrine should be allowed to have good days if it is trying. Veer vanished from public channels for a spell, the way winter often pretends it has ended before it shows the last teeth it has saved for the unwise. The last escalation waited where everything that matters hides a place that looked like it had nothing anybody would ever try to steal It was a nursery station inside a service ring around a brown dwarf called Linnet, where gravity sulked and light did its work out of habit. Families who traveled twined their children there for a month at a time so they could run in stable corridors and learn what chairs feel like when chairs never move. There were finger paint stations and mushroom walls and a tiny museum of broken bolts for small hands to hold and learn the virtues of failure. The air smelled like clean plastic warmed by small bodies, and the floors squeaked the way safe places should. We did not choose it for a set piece. They did. Presidium auditors arrived with binders painted in pastel shades that made my stomach cold. Their doctrine was a gratitude nursery levy, since the station prevented piracy by making goodwill among travelers. The Presidium claimed a tax of future productivity secured by small signatures. Parents could pledge a fraction of their child's future wages in exchange for discounted corridor time. Now, it was clean. It was cunning. It was contempt. You cannot carve tomorrow into coupons today. We arrived to find Yara already there. Ribbon in place. Expression neutral. She looked at the toy shelf like a person remembering how wood feels in hands that haven't earned calluses yet. Veer did not come. He must have known something about the room he could not bear to face, even in victory. We convened a corridor of law much shorter than I liked because toddlers have opinions about benches. We asked parents to speak, and they did so in voices that tried not to frighten their own children. We asked the auditors to state method, and they did. Crisp and vile, and confident that kind tones make knives kinder. We asked the stewards what they wanted, and they said tea and time, and a roof nobody would ever try to bill. We built the mirror differently here. We wrote it in props. We put the Levy's return on a wall-sized counting frame built from pipes and beads, the sort in every school where arithmetic makes music if you shove the bead hard enough. We bound the Presidium's pledge stream to the frame. Then we tied the frame to the public net so every bead that moved sent a chime across the slow thread. Finally, we set the rule every time their levy rose. The frame would demand a public vote before a bead could slide past the line marked tomorrow. A child named Vale, with a gap in his teeth and a determination older than taxation, took the first bead and whacked it with his palm. It hit the line and stopped dead. Because nobody had voted, and because a toddler had more sense than a book. This accounting has a witness who refuses to age. Yara stared at the frame a long time. She did not argue. She looked at the auditors and at the parents, and at a small girl painting a mushroom house with a color she had named Sunrise Tears. Then she undid her ribbon and tied it to the frame at the line called Tomorrow. "I can't sell this," she said, flat, even to me. The auditors made a note like a man polishing a nail. "We will workshop the instrument." One said. "You will compost it," I said. "Then plant something that feeds people now." He said nothing because the room was full of small eyes that had already chosen sides and would remember names. We ate crackers in the cafeteria and listened to the sound of plastic cups on tables. Harker repaired a hinge nobody had asked him to touch. Pilar taught a counting game that turned votes into a rhythm you can clap. Vance drafted a clause in language so plain a child could ask their parent to read it twice and smile the second time. We made it to the dock, and Gavel 13 was humming something that felt like a lullaby written by a librarian. Soft and precise. When the last message came from Concordia Arc, it was not from Veer. It was not from Yara. It was from the magistrate. It smelled like iron and regret and the end of an old meeting nobody wanted to leave. "Presidium Concordium appeals to the slow thread," she said. Voice stripped to bone and duty. "They want old books to bless new bonds. The appeal will take months, maybe years. While it moves, your corridor stands. While it moves, their collars fall into bins labeled history and shame. While it moves, your mirrors must not fail. Will you keep them standing? I looked at the fonts, at the lamps dimmer than I loved, at the mirror array that pulsed like a school of fish committing to swim together instead of apart. I felt the ache under my sternum and the nerves in my hands that refused to be steady when letters mattered. I thought of Ari's bracelet and Essen's wrist and the way soup tastes when a verdict cools the kitchen just enough to breathe. Yeah, I said, even if we whisper. Even if we whisper. We took the long road home to nowhere because law doesn't have a house and the net is every table with 6 chairs and more if you squeeze. We set watch kitchens wherever people walked. We taught stewards to read mirrorgraphs the way you read a friend's face when they say they're fine, and you know they mean they're tired. We gave up speed and glamour for repetition and respect, and a ledger so plain even thieves could blush. Gavel 13 kept singing even when her fonts begged for rest. She learned to make economy sound like grace. She learned to send numbers as lullabies to children who slept better when a public counter ticked up in a kitchen they would visit tomorrow. The day the slow thread answered, the light at the edge of the net looked like a field of grain deciding which way to bow. The message was 4 lines and a stamp. It did not fix everything. It did not end hunger. It did not even end the Presidium doctrines like that are too clever to die quickly. But it locked a door that should never have been left open. It wrote a rule we could carry in our pockets and point to when hands ours or theirs reached for chains. On the Aurora Court's dais, the public ledger entry blinked, confirmed once, twice, and then held steady. The text, a simple block against an old dark. I stood with my hands on the rail, polished by 1,000 worried palms, and spoke for the quiet rooms, the loud kitchens, and the corridors that smell like soup after long meetings. We did not win by being brilliant. We won by being patient. We did not defeat them with fire. We returned the heat they stole to the pots that feed us. We did not teach by fear. We taught by counting and letting the counts be seen. We will still lose days. We will still hurt bodies. We will still stand in halls where people wear ribbons and talk about necessary roughness, as if the world were a field and we were weeds. But the mirror stands. The ledger is ours. The bell rings in our voices when they come again, and they will. We will walk them down a corridor made of witnesses and light, and ask them to speak out loud until they hear themselves. We don't need mercy when we have each other's receipts.